You log into your brokerage account on a random Tuesday, and there it is, $250,000. You stare at the screen, feeling this massive, intoxicating wave of relief, because you finally hit the milestone everyone talks about. You think the hard part is over, but you don't realize that the exact moment you see that number, a psychological switch flips in your brain that is statistically rigged to destroy everything you just built. You haven't arrived. You've just entered the most dangerous financial dead zone of your entire life. Look, I've been sitting across the desk from people making serious money for 30 years now, and I see the exact same tragedy play out every single week. People think building wealth is just this straight, linear line. You save $1, you are $1 richer. You save 100,000, you feel 100,000 safer. On the surface, this makes sense, but in reality, wealth doesn't work like that at all. There are invisible tripwires buried in the math, and $250,000 is the deadliest one of them all. Because $250,000 is exactly enough money to make you feel invincible, but nowhere near enough money to actually protect you when you do something stupid. What almost nobody realizes is that when you cross that threshold, your money starts moving faster than your paycheck. You wake up, the market has a good day, and your portfolio jumps by $4,000 or $5,000. Your brain looks at that and says, wait a minute, I just made a month's salary while I was drinking my coffee. It is a profound, dopamine-flooded rush. And that feeling, that specific illusion of having arrived, is the exact mechanism that turns high-income earners into incredibly stressed, highly leveraged prisoners of their own lives. Let me tell you about Brian. Brian is 36. Making about $180,000 a year in corporate logistics. He is a smart guy. He really is. For 8 years, he kept his head down. He drove a modest car, he lived in an okay apartment, and he aggressively shoveled money into his investments. Then, about a year ago, Brian crossed the $250,000 mark. When he saw that number, his internal narrative completely shifted. He didn't see himself as a guy grinding it out anymore. He saw himself as a wealthy guy. And wealthy guys don't live in okay apartments or drive 7-year-old cars. So, Brian decided it was time to reward himself. He used the mental safety net of his portfolio to justify financing a $75,000 luxury SUV. He upgraded to a massive house in a premium zip code because, he was building equity. He told himself it was just a strategic reallocation of assets. But here's where it gets interesting. Brian didn't touch his $250,000. It was sitting right there in his accounts. He was rich on paper. But to support this new wealthy identity, his monthly fixed overhead skyrocketed. His mortgage, his car payment, his premium insurance, they devoured every single dollar of his high income. Brian unwittingly walked straight into the high-income poverty trap. He had $250,000, but his checking account was gasping for air by the 25th of every month. And this is the part that should worry you, because the stress of that cash flow chokehold completely changes your brain chemistry. When you have no margin in your daily life, you lose your cognitive flexibility. Brian went to a neighborhood barbecue and started talking to a guy who was bragging about making a killing in some speculative crypto venture and flipping suburban real estate. And this is where everything starts to break. Brian, feeling the agonizing pinch of his new massive overhead, looked at his boring index funds and felt this sudden, burning wave of inadequacy. He felt behind. He had the house and the car, but he didn't have the cash to breathe. And here was this guy claiming to print money on the weekends. So Brian's overconfidence monster woke up. He told himself that because he had built a $250,000 portfolio, he was clearly a financial genius. He was too smart for boring 8% returns. He took $40,000 out of his stable investments and threw it into a highly leveraged, speculative play, telling himself he could afford to lose it because he still had over $200,000 left. And Brian didn't realize this until it was too late. But you can never afford to lose $40,000 at that stage of the game. He wasn't just losing $40,000. He was assassinating the compounding engine of his future. When the speculative play collapsed, which it almost always does, Brian didn't just lose the money. He lost his psychological anchor. He panicked. He sold other assets at the bottom to cover the massive overhead of his lifestyle and within 18 months, he had wiped out 4 years of disciplined, agonizing sacrifice. He was back to zero leverage, stuck in a house he couldn't afford to leave, working a job he was terrified of losing. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think the danger of losing money is just the math. It isn't. The danger is what it does to your soul. When you taste that level of security and then actively destroy it because of your own ego, the future regret is almost paralyzing. You look at your expensive car in the driveway and you literally feel sick to your stomach because you know exactly what it cost you. Now I want you to look at someone who played this completely differently. We'll call her Michelle. Michelle works in the same industry as Brian, makes the exact same income, and crossed the exact same $250,000 milestone around the exact same time. When Michelle saw that number, she felt the exact same dopamine hit that Brian did. She is human, you know. She went to the dealership. She sat in the leather seat of the luxury car. She looked at the real estate listings in the expensive neighborhoods. She felt the massive societal pull to make her invisible wealth visible to the world. But Michelle understood something about the mathematics of time that most people completely ignore. She knew that in the world of compound interest, $250,000 isn't a quarter of the way to $1 million. In terms of actual chronological time, $250,000 is halfway to $1 million. Let me say that again so it really sinks in. If it took you 12 years to save your first $250,000, it will take you roughly the exact same amount of time to generate the next $750,000, assuming you just leave it alone and let the market work. When Michelle realized she was literally halfway to the finish line, she looked at the expensive car and the massive mortgage, and she realized they weren't rewards. They were reset buttons. If she inflated her lifestyle to match her net worth, she would have to siphon the fuel out of her compounding engine to pay for her overhead. She would be trading her future freedom for current validation. So Michelle did the hardest thing a high-income earner can possibly do in America today. She chose to remain invisible. She kept the boring car. She stayed in the modest townhouse. She let her friends subtly flex their new watches and their premium vacations, and she just smiled and nodded. Because what almost nobody realizes is that when you have $250,000 silently working for you in the background, and your overhead is ruthlessly low, you develop a completely different aura. Michelle wasn't depriving herself. She was buying psychological armor. When her company went through a massive restructuring and the executives started demanding insane hours and threatening layoffs, Brian was having panic attacks in his cubicle because he needed his paycheck to cover the SUV and the zip code. Michelle slept like a baby. She knew that if she was fired tomorrow, her deeply defended lifestyle and her massive liquid reserves meant she didn't have to change a single thing about her daily routine for 5 years. Because she wasn't desperate, she didn't act desperate. She pushed back on bad projects. She calmly stated her boundaries. She operated with the cold, detached power of someone who genuinely does not need the room to like her. And the brutal irony of the corporate world is that the less you need them, the more they value you. Michelle got the promotion Brian was desperate for, simply because she had the emotional bandwidth to actually lead rather than just survive. You see, the system is perfectly engineered to make you feel like you are always falling behind. It preys on your biological need for social comparison. You open your phone, and you are bombarded with images of people who seem to have cracked the code. You see the massive houses, the luxury trips, the effortless wealth. But I need you to understand that you are comparing your behind-the-scenes reality to their highly leveraged, deeply fragile highlight reel. If you are sitting right now with a high income, watching your portfolio grow, feeling that itch to finally prove to everyone that you made it, I need you to stop. You have to actively initiate an ego death. You have to decide that you are completely fine with your brother-in-law thinking he is more successful than you. You have to be okay with the valet parking your boring car next to a Porsche. You have to starve your ego today so that your future self doesn't have to eat dirt, because the clock is ticking. The window to let compound interest do the heavy lifting for you is incredibly unforgiving. Every dollar you permanently assign to the fixed overhead of an inflated lifestyle is a dollar that can never replicate itself. You are standing at the exact point of no return. The money has finally built enough mass to generate its own gravity. It is rolling down the hill. Your only job right now is to step out of its way and not screw it up by getting creative. Are you going to be like Brian, using your success as an excuse to build a beautiful, velvet-lined prison that you will have to grind in until you are 65 years old? Or are you going to be like Michelle? Are you going to embrace the quiet, unglamorous, boring reality of actual wealth accumulation? The choice is entirely yours, but you cannot delay it. The next time you look at that balance on your screen and feel the urge to upgrade your life, what are you actually going to do?